The year is 1762, and a young Linus Colt is accompanying his father, brothers, and the Virginia militia on a campaign to rid the region of Shawnee Indians. The French and Indian War has been raging on for almost a decade, and the Shawnee tribe has grown in power since receiving French aid, and they have started pushing the settlers back from the frontier. After a recent massacre near Draper, Virginia, many men from Augusta County formed their own militia to get revenge on the Shawnee. Linus Colt was only 16 at the time and was more of a scholar than a soldier, but his father made it his mission to shame his son any chance he got. Linus's grandfather had been a colonel in the British cavalry, and his father had participated in many battles against the Indians of the frontier, and he wanted his sons to be soldiers just like him. The Colt family were gifted horsemen and scouts, but Linus was the only one who did not have any ambitions about becoming a soldier. His uncle had been a surveyor in the South, and Linus wanted to follow in his footsteps. Linus had planned on going to Philadelphia to study in college, and his father had always objected to this. For years, the boundaries of the frontier had been pushed back, and his father had wanted to be at the forefront of the expansion efforts. Linus refused to go with his father on this attack, but his father challenged his manhood in front of a crowd, and Linus felt like he had no choice. He was forced to prove himself. The militia had tracked the Shawnee to a small clearing near modern Troutville, Virginia, and they planned an early morning ambush. Armed with rifles, swords, and bayonets, the militia quietly surrounded the camp and waited for sunrise. When daylight came, they let out a horrible screech and attacked the sleeping Shawnee, and it was a bloodbath. Linus had hung back while the others charged forward until his father grabbed him and forced him to participate in the attack. Linus was a good shot, and he quickly took out a few Shawnee warriors as they tried to flee. The attack was a massacre and was over in just minutes, and the Shawnee who weren't killed were taken prisoner. The Shawnee had a reputation for torturing their prisoners, and the militia would do the same to them. Many of the prisoners were beheaded or shot, and then their bodies mutilated. Linus refused to take part in this, but his father once again challenged his son's manhood and toughness. He drug Linus to the center of the circle, and the whole militia began to make fun of him. They then presented him with a Shawnee prisoner and demanded that Linus behead the defenseless warrior. Linus wanted no part of this, but he felt like he had no choice, so he took his grandfather's sword, still dripping blood from the last victim, and beheaded the warrior before scalping him. This moment would stay with Linus the rest of his life, he would go on to later write. He would never go on another raid with his father, and he moved to Charlottesville in 1770 to start his own life. In 1772, he would marry Sarah Brooks, and they would go on to have 2 children and their own farm just east of town. Linus became a self-taught surveyor, and he would lead many expeditions into Kentucky and even worked with the Virginia governor to design accurate maps of the frontier. At this point, Linus was 6'3", strong, intelligent, and devoted to his family and his career. However, he did suffer from what we would identify as PTSD, and he frequently complained that he was haunted by memories from his past, specifically the attack on the Shawnee. He carried his grandfather's sword, the one he killed the warrior with, everywhere he went, and he said he carried it to prove his manhood to his deceased grandfather and to his father. In 1773, his property was seized by the crown after not being able to pay taxes that had recently been imposed while he was away. He moved his family to Stanton and would remain there for the duration of his life. In 1775, he resumed leading expeditions to southwestern Virginia, but increasing Indian numbers forced him to stop until he had more men with him. Around this time, he had formed a small militia that would provide protection during his expeditions, and their numbers were about 75 at the start of 1776. In 1776, once war broke out, his hatred of the British government made him enlist his militia to help the American forces in the region. He wanted revenge for the seizure of his property, but this was all he wanted. Once the British were driven out of Virginia, he had no plans on continuing to fight the war. His first battle came on Gwynn's Island on July 9, 1776. The attack was vicious, and Linus and his men fought hard to drive the British off the field. Towards the end of the battle, Linus was wounded in the leg and had to be carried off the field. After this, he resigned his command and returned back home to Stanton to recover and live a peaceful life as a farmer. However, in 1779, he received word that his brother Jack, who was living in South Carolina, was being harassed by Loyalists who demanded that he join the British or his family would be killed. Remembering how the British took his land in 1773 and injured him in battle, he went searching for men to join him on a mission to rescue his brother and bring his family to Virginia. In April of 1779, 75 men joined Linus and formed Colt's Rangers. Many of these men had fought with him in the French and Indian War and at Gwynn's Island. They wore buckskins with bird feathers in their caps and carried sabers in the saddle, but also carried hunting rifles. They had no flag, but would eventually be given a flag later in the campaign. The Rangers arrived at his brother's farm in May after a rough ride south, and they would start to move supplies into wagons they had commandeered to make the trip back to Virginia. They would be harassed by local Loyalist forces, but his brother's family were successfully sent on their way back home. The plan was to take his Rangers home, but they had received word that many other families in the area were being tormented by Loyalists, and Linus put it to a vote among his men. Do they all go back home, or do they stay and help out the local families in need? The vote was unanimous. Colt's Rangers would stay in South Carolina.